MR Credit 4 recycled content has 1 to 2 points available for new construction, schools, and core and shell. The requirement is to use material with recycled content where the sum of the post-consumer recycled content plus 1/2 of the pre-consumer content equals the thresholds in the table below. It's important to note that LEED version 3 Building Design and Construction emphasizes post-consumer recycled content because that's a material at the end of its life before it goes to a landfill. So it's important to be thinking how we can reuse those materials in our manufacturing and repurposing of materials. So 10% recycled content is based on your total material budget again. Gets you 1 point, 20% gets you 2 points, and 30% gets you an exemplary performance innovation design point. Recycled content shall be defined in accordance with the International Organization for Standardization document ISO 14021, Environmental Label and Declarations, Self-Declared Environmental Claims. It's really important to remember that ISO 14021, that is the standard to memorize for this credit. You can check out the website and provide symbols and graphics and general methodology for verifying products. Terminology is important to understand for the test. Pre-consumer material or post-industrial, those two are synonymous with each other, is material diverted from the waste stream during the manufacturing process. So that includes planer shavings, sawdust chips, sunflower seed hulls that I've seen used for things such as cabinets, and print overruns. Excluded materials are capable of same process that's generated in it, meaning if it's rework, regrind, or scrap, something that's typically reused in the manufacturing facility, that does not count as pre-consumer material. Post-consumer material is waste material generated by households or public facilities which can no longer be used for its intended purpose. Examples include construction and demolition debris, curbside recycling, broken pallets from refurbishing company, discarded products such as furniture, and urban maintenance waste, including leaves, grass, trees, trimmings, etc. The image here is of tires were used for exterior paving. Keep in mind that LEED version 3, Building Design Construction, does emphasize post-consumer recycled content over pre-consumer recycled content. That's why only 1/2 pre-consumer recycled content is in the equation. It is a total of the two added together, so both are important. Just important to know what to emphasize as you're speccing material and educate manufacturers on what is important to you. That's how the market is transforming through the LEED rating system in these buildings. Equation 1, recycled content value based on cost. It's a percent post-consumer times the material cost. So that percent post-consumer is based on weight to start with. So you get that percent recycled content of the material, such as recycled content in a carpet. It's based on the total weight of that recycled content in the assembly. Once you get that percentage, you multiply it towards the material cost, then you add that to the pre-consumer recycled content times material cost divided by 2 if it's pre-consumer recycled content. You add those two together, get your percentage recycled content, then you take your total recycled content value divided by total material cost times 100. So the assembly recycled content value is the percent post-consumer over total assembly weight times assembly cost plus percent consumer over assembly weight times 0.5 times assembly cost. So that's just expanding the idea of how you get that percent pre-consumer, post-consumer. We have some exercises that can work through this. Default values include 45% total construction costs can be considered your total material costs if you're not actually tabulating real costs coming in. Also, there's a default recycled content value of steel of 25%, although I don't recommend using this default value since steel has a high cost if you're using metal construction, and it's usually over 90% post-consumer recycled content. The difficult part is getting the steel industry to actually report those percentages and not give you general statements such as steel is 100% recyclable. That type of letter from the manufacturer will not work. You need to get actual percentage based on weight of that scrap post-consumer recycled content that's melted down into that batch that goes into your building. So it is project specific. You need to get that information from the industry, and it's good to get our industry and manufacturers to be more transparent with what's going into our building materials. That also goes for indoor environmental quality and health issues as well. So it's all pushing the industry to transform in a positive way for our health and our environment. For supplementary cementitious material, SCMs, it may be based on mass rather than a percentage of the concrete mix. Example of this is fly ash, since they're very light in weight. Another example would be slag and cement as well. Mechanical, electrical, and plumbing components are not included because they skew the results. So that's consistent through these credits. Provide total material costs. So this can be either the 45% material cost default or the hard cost from CSI master format divisions 3 through 10 and parts of 2, or in the newer specs 31 and 32. We'll provide a tabulation of each material with recycled content and then an aggregate total of what percent based on cost have post-consumer and one have pre-consumer recycled content in it. The documentation must include a description of the material, the manufacturer, the product costs, the pre-consumer and or post-consumer recycled content percentage, and the source of the recycled content data. It needs to come from the manufacturer. You can provide an optional narrative as well, but it's most important to have that tracking tool. That's something that we find very important in our lead consulting at EcoReal. Benefits include reducing virgin material use and solid waste. And post-consumer value has a greater environmental benefit over the life cycle of the product since it was going to go to a landfill. So once again, it's the idea of cradle to cradle and actually planning products that can be reused more easily instead of going to a landfill. Most products can now be found with recycled content, but you need to ask your manufacturer what percent. Don't just read a greenwash label that really emphasizes all these sustainable attributes, but it's really when you get those actual percentages of recycled content or rapidly renewable, other sustainable attributes that you really find out the value of those labels. Make sure to ask questions. It's really important. I see when I go to trade shows on the exhibit floor and everybody's spouting off over the last year especially about their green attributes of their products, and then I find out just through a couple questions which ones are the real deal. And LEAD helps you ask those educated questions like what percent post-consumer recycled content is in this product or pre-consumer, how much salvage material is in it based on the total material weight. And you really start to get them to think about their claims and ask them what standard they refer to make those calculations. For recycled content, we saw ISO standard 14021, for example. There are synergies also between the material and resource credits and also with the indoor environmental quality credits for low emitting materials that we'll get to in the next section. Here's an example of a spreadsheet to calculate recycled content. What our GBIM software does is then take this information and calculate your totals towards your goal, that 10% of your total material cost value, for example, if that's your goal. So you have your product name, your vendor, your product costs, the post-consumer and post-industrial or pre-consumer recycled content, the information source, and it's important to have your submittal number so you can go back and verify it with your construction records. So once again, correlating to your master submittal log and your construction management process. We feel strongly that in our LEED consulting, there needs to be more integration of LEED with construction management protocols. As I mentioned before, it should be in your safety meetings. The quality assurance person should be watching what's coming on site in terms of low emitting materials, FSC certified wood, and other things we'll look at later points in the webinar. The main thing is to track everything coming on site and make sure that everything's clearly specified in your specs and that it's carried throughout your construction documents and execution on site. Recycled content. Example in a product is done by 3form. They have a line called As Green as It Gets. It's 100% made from 100% post-consumer recycled content, high density polyethylene. So over 1,000 milk bottles go into each panel for those desktops. Just one example of the innovative products coming out in the industry today. MR Credit 5 is regional materials. New construction can earn 1 to 2 points. Schools 1 to 2 points. And core and shell 1 to 2 points. The requirement is building materials or products must have been extracted, harvested, or recovered, as well as manufactured within a 500-mile radius of the project. It's important to educate the contractors on the roles and responsibilities right in pre-bid and help them to understand that these products aren't just manufactured within 500 miles, but they're also extracted or harvested, the raw materials, from within 500 miles. So they need to be asking these questions right away with their manufacturer and vendors to make sure they're getting the most regional materials they can, even down to those raw materials. Similar to the past two credits, the percentage is based on material costs. 10% of the total material budget gets you 1 point, 20% gets you 2 points, similar to MR Credit 4, and 30% gets you an exemplary performance innovation design point. As I mentioned, the general contractor should work with the subcontractors early on to identify available materials, and architects need to clearly define it in the specs. If this isn't done, it could end up a box of submittals at the end of a project they're reviewed, and then you find out you don't meet the credit requirements. It really needs to be tabulated throughout and clearly communicated throughout the design and construction management process. The contractor should especially focus on these materials that meet this criteria during the buyout phase. And then the contractor needs to track the materials of the regional materials. So the contractor tracks the material costs of the regional materials. As you see in this image, it's good to give a Google Earth image with a radius to show just a general idea of what regional material means with that 500-mile radius. When you're on a coast, you lose some availability of where things can be manufactured regionally with oceanside. And it gives you the idea of what states and cities portions were in that 500-mile radius. The central part of a country can actually have more opportunity for regional material production. It's important to feed your local economy and be aware of those local resources as well. So there's synergy with economic reasons to do it as well. For assemblies, there can be partial compliance. So often it's hard to find materials that 100% of the product has raw materials and is manufactured with a 500-mile radius, but sometimes part of the material is, such as maybe the aggregate in the concrete came from a local quarry. So you count the total weight of that aggregate in the concrete as part of the cost that can contribute towards regional material. So if a fraction of the product is a regional material, then that percentage by way of the product will contribute to the regional value. This is similar to calculation for recycled content as well. So if the product has multiple points of extraction, list the one with the greatest distance. we'll look at some exercises to utilize this calculation as well. Synergy with MR Credit 3. Use the following criteria to apply for this credit as well. Location where salvage equals point of manufacture. Location originally manufactured equals point of extraction. And on-site salvage materials automatically qualify. Documentation, you need to make a list of products manufactured, extracted, or harvested within 500 miles, including a list of the manufacturer's names, product costs, less labor and equipment, distance between the manufacturer and project, and the distance between project and extraction site. So both need to comply, or at least part of the assembly, with the manufacturing location and extraction site within 500 miles. It can't be just one of those, but it can be only a portion of the product total. It's an important concept to understand, and you may need to review. Here's a spreadsheet keeping track of product name, vendor, product costs, and the distance between the project and manufacturer, and the distance between project and extraction site. So only when a portion of the product complies with both of those are you able to count any of the product costs towards the total going to meet the goal of either 10 or 20% regional material. So you see with Dietrich Metal Framing, second row down, the distance of the manufacturer and the extraction site are both less than 500 miles. So if the whole product applied to that, then that entire 417,565 could be counted towards the aggregate total. And then that aggregate total needs to be at least 10% of the total material costs to earn 1 credit for regional material, just to put it into scale. Credit synergies are important to understand, especially how these material resource credits interrelate. MR Credit 1.2, build and reuse, non-structural, and MR Credit 3, material reuse, are important to be able to differentiate between. Material reuse for its original function applied to MR Credit 1.2, whereas reused materials that serve a different purpose, such as a door used as a table, apply to MR Credit 3. For MR Credit 2, construction waste management, and MR Credit 1, building reuse, the reused material for projects that can't apply for MR Credit 1 because the addition is more than allowable square footage, meaning it's 2 times or greater the existing building, the reused material can be applied to MR Credit 2, construction waste management. Next, MR Credit 3, material reuse, and MR Credit 5, regional material, the salvage material both on-site and off-site from MR Credit 3 can be applied to MR Credit 5, regional material. So reusing material on-site is an easy way to contribute towards both MR Credit 3 and MR Credit 5. And that's an important thing to note, that material or product only contributes towards these credit. You don't have a single material that is certified itself. It's just helping towards that total cost percentage of the total material cost budget towards getting towards your goals. Not one isolated material can get you there by itself in most cases.